Welcome to the photography workshop. My name is Toqeer Sethi. I'm a photojournalist and filmmaker. I live in Peterborough and I do a lot of street photography. I've done some street photography around Peterborough, but I generally travel around the world, mostly with non-government organizations like charities. My most recent trip was in Bangladesh, and I did a lot of street photography there. And I'll be sharing some of those images, but I have had the good fortune to travel to Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Lebanon, Jordan, and a lot of the time the photography is to do with around refugees or conflict zones or areas around conflict zones where people have been displaced. So I look forward to sharing some of my images with you today, but I'll also be giving you I suppose a crash course on how to take a good image and what you would consider to be a good image. Now, whenever I think about a photograph, I think about a few things which I think are really important. And the first thing is framing and composure. So when you're photographing something, you need to think about what exactly it is that you're photographing, and how you want it to be framed. So I'm going to load up a few images for you now. I'm going to load this one up and I'm going to share my screen with you guys. Okay, so what you should be seeing now is an image of some plants in my back garden, and these plants are actually quite pretty. It was a nice sunny day, and we've got a tomato plant on the right hand side. They're all, clustered together and they look nice. But if you look at the image carefully, you will notice that my shadow is being cast over the left side of the image, which is a distraction. So that's the first thing, making sure that you're standing in the right place and looking at the lighting source. And if you're shooting in natural light, you must make sure that you're not blocking the light or creating a shadow, or that it's not too bright. Depending on what you're using to take your photo, if you're using your iPhone or another smartphone, then your phone will automatically correct for exposure and make the exposure right. If you're using a DSLR or some form of semi-professional camera, or even an entry-level camera, you probably will have to adjust the exposure or put it in auto mode and let it adjust the exposure itself. So coming back to this photo, obviously we've got the shadow on the left-hand side, and also the image isn't very flattering because the camera is pointing downwards, and it just looks very unnatural and it doesn't look very nice. So I'm going to load up a different image for you guys. So I'll delete this, and I'm going to load up, it's the same area, but I'm going to load up a different image. It's this one over here.
Someone's entering the chat, by the way.
Okay, that's fine, Emily. So now you can see. I think we've got somebody entering the chat, so I might just wait.
Kath. Welcome to the workshop. We've just started, but I'm sure we can bring you up to speed. It'd be great if you could keep your microphone muted throughout the workshop, but if you want to put your camera on, you're very welcome.
Welcome to the workshop. I was just talking about how we frame our images and make our images look good, and even make a boring scenario interesting. So this is one image that I was sharing, but I'm going to go back to the previous image very, very briefly, just for your benefit. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to start the screen share again with the previous image. Whilst I get used to this, there we go. So screen share, and we're looking at this image here. Okay, so this image, once again, I was just talking about this image. As you can see, the image isn't very flattering because on the left-hand side, I've cast a shadow whilst I was taking a photo, and it just doesn't look very flattering. And if you think about the angle that you would probably look at some plants or anything growing in your garden, you probably go down on your feet or on your knees to be at the same level as whatever you're looking at. So if I stop this and load up the other image, which I had, I don't know if you can see that. There we go. This is the next image. Now, obviously, this is the same location, and the image is just far more flattering. And the reason why it's more flattering is because the angle is correct. It's in my line of sight as if I'm sitting on the floor. And also, there's no shadows being cast. There's a natural shadow by the plant pot at the front, but it's not distracting to the image. And also you can see that there's a backdrop. We got some nice blue sky, we got some greenery, and now it looks like there are some plant pots in the back of somebody's garden and they're a keen gardener. And you can take whatever you like from this image, but it just looks far more flattering. Now, depending on the quality of your camera, you can get this out of focus background and you can get this separation. And really that's down to how much money you're prepared to spend on a lens, and how far you're prepared to go to create that separation. But that doesn't necessarily add to the quality of your composure, the quality of your framing. You have to know what you're framing. Now, just to give you a quick, if I go back to my earlier days of photography, I didn't have an expensive camera, and I did have a DSLR, but I wouldn't take it out very often because I always found my mobile phone to be far more convenient. And if you're going to start learning to photograph, I recommend that you use your mobile phone. A lot of the new iPhones and Android phones are so capable these days, and it's great because you can just learn to frame your images really, really quickly by having your phone with you and taking a photograph of anything that you think that is interesting. So this is obviously those years of experience where I say, okay, I know how I would like to have this photograph taken. Now, this is a really expensive lens because it's creating this out of focus background, the separation. But once again, that's really not that important. It's about the lighting, it's about making the image look pretty. And you can see these plant pots, they all look really nicely lined up compared to the previous photo. I'm going to load up another example of framing and composure. So I'll stop the share. There we go. Okay, so this is my back garden going the other way. It doesn't look bad, my back garden looks quite nice, my house looks nice, everything looks quite good there. You can see the plants, the pots, but if you look carefully to the right hand side of the image, you'll see that I don't know if you can see my mouse here, you'll see that the angle of my camera is facing down, so it's not parallel to the building work. So when we look at photography, we also like to look at leading lines and making sure that our lines are straight. I mean, that's something that I particularly like to do, to keep my angle of my camera parallel to the ground, so that the image just looks a little bit more flattering. So I'm going to load up another image where I've actually done that. So I'm gonna stop the share. And it's this image here. So I don't know if you can tell the difference. The camera is far lower down. That the outbuilding there is now straight. The brickwork looks straight. The camera straight, and it just creates for a little bit more of a flattering image, as far as I'm concerned. But the thing is, I see a lot of people with their cameras pointing their cameras down like this. I can demonstrate. I see a lot of people pointing their cameras when they're taking a photograph, pointing their cameras down like this, or when they're taking a photograph of the sky, they'll be like this. And some objects are going to be really tall that you can't obviously be as tall. So when you're taking if you're taking a photograph of a tree, you're going to have to be up like that. Or if you're taking something which is on the floor like a pebble, you're not going to be able to get to that level. So sometimes it is okay to angle your camera like this, or like this, or in your case, like this, or like this. And that's fine to do that. But if you're going to be taking photographs of people or anything that is in your line of sight, and you can get yourself to the correct angle, I always recommend that you make sure that the angle is flattering, because that also creates for a really nice image. Okay, so and the other thing I mentioned was if you're using a smartphone, then your smartphone will correct the exposure itself. If you're using a DSLR camera, then you may have to correct that exposure unless you're using it in automatic mode. So now a couple of other things I wanted to share with regards to framing, and especially with people. I'm going to load up another image of my daughter. I took this yesterday for the benefit of this session. Okay, so you can see my daughter now. Not a bad image. The background's really nicely out of focus. Her face is generally quite well lit, and you can make her face out. However, it's not a very flattering image because her chin's chopped off, and she's right at the bottom of the frame. And when we look at framing, we have something called the rule of thirds. So if you're taking a photograph of somebody, you should try and think about splitting your frame into 3 parts. So if you imagine looking at a house, you've got the sky, you've got the house, and then you've got the ground in front of you, and the frame should be split into 3 where possible, especially when you're taking photographs of people. So here, the frame isn't split into 3. She's right at the bottom of the frame, and it's not very flattering at all. So whenever we try and take photos of people, we try and get them in the middle of the frame, unless we're trying to show something else. And I've not really found many examples through my time as a photographer where we've had people squashed in the side of a frame or right at the bottom. Sometimes you will see photos of people standing next to a billboard. Obviously the billboard is much higher and you have to step back or zoom out, and then they're right at the bottom of the frame, and then you've got the advertisement at the back. Sometimes you'll see that. Most of the time when you're doing photography, you want to have the rule of thirds in place. So I'm gonna change up the image and show you an image which I think is better. Okay, so now she's more in the middle of the frame. She's still nicely lit, and it just makes for a more pleasing image. Would I take photographs like this? I mean, this is for the purpose of this video. I probably wouldn't be this close up to someone's face unless I was doing some form of headshot photography, which they wanted for LinkedIn or their Facebook or their ID badge or something like that. If I was to take a photograph of somebody, I'd probably be a little bit more zoomed out. And also, it's really important that when you take a photograph of somebody in a natural setting, it's important to get the natural setting in. So here, that's inside my conservatory you can't really see much in the background. But yes, it's beautifully out of focus. But as far as the context goes, it's just somebody's face. Where's the photo being taken? What are you trying to show? If you think about an image having its own story, depending on what you take an image of or where you're taking it, then it's important that we think about context and why that image was taken and what that image means to you as the photographer and what that image means to the person who's in the image or to anybody else that may look at it. So one of the important parts of photography is framing and composure, and those images that I showed you here were all part of framing and composure. Context is really important, so I'm going to talk about context now, and I just touched upon it. I'm going to stop sharing this image and share you a different image of my daughter once again. Okay, so here once again, ignore the banding that's come across. I think the image didn't export properly. Once again, there she is, sat on a chair outside. Okay, the one thing that you're going to notice is that the sunlight is hitting one side of her face, but not the other. Sometimes you like that, sometimes you may not. If you look at me now, if you can see me, I've got a light source coming in through the window. So this side of my face is nicely lit, and this side of my face isn't. Sometimes that can be flattering, depending on how you're taking your image. And sometimes it can just be really annoying and you wish you had a light source on this side to perfectly expose your face. I suppose for the purpose of this video, I ought to be sat like this, where there's light sources coming over my face, but I've got a little lamp here, which I've tried to bounce light off onto my face. So here, once again, if you look at this image, it's not very sharp. She's a little bit out of focus. Her eyes are almost squinting because it's too bright for her. So where I've asked her to sit is probably not right. And it's not the nicest of photos. It's certainly not very flattering at all. So I'm going to share a different image with you, which shows an image that's better composed. There we go. So what you see now is, even though it's still very bright, you can now see a context to the image. So she sat in the garden. You could see there's, the outhouse. You can see plants in the background. And if you were to look at this image 10 years down the line, you'd recognize it because it's my daughter, and you'll know where you lived, and all those memories would come back to you because you've seen not just the person, but you've seen the context in which that image was taken. So framing and exposure is really important, and context is important, so that we can take photographs of people, but if we don't know where they are, then we're left guessing, or we can't think about what was happening. And often when I've looked back at photos of my parents, I've looked at a photo and I thought, oh, I remember that. That was the day when this happened. That was the day when this happened. And you can do that because there are elements in the image which kind of like do a callback for your brain, and then you can remember what's going on. So framing your image and your context is really, really important. And I would say that those are the first things that you need to learn to do. And sometimes images can be boring if you're just taking them around the house or if you're just in your back garden. So take your camera, your mobile phone out with you, and you can photograph outdoors as you're walking down the street. And if you've got your mobile phone, most people aren't going to batter an eyelid about that. If you're carrying a big heavy camera like this, some people may ask questions or what you're photographing. But really, without getting into all the legalities, we are actually allowed to photograph out on the street, and we can actually photograph people as well. And we can actually photograph people and put their images on our Facebook, our social media, without asking their permission. Whether you want to do that or not, I don't know. I don't want to spoil somebody's day. If they don't want to be on, if they don't want you to take a photo, don't take the photo. But you can legally do that. The only time that you can't is when you take their photo and then sell it to a brand. So, for example, if they're wearing an Adidas top and you sell the photo to Adidas, then you need their permission. So most of the time, if you're out with your mobile phone or a small camera, you're free to take all sorts of photos. So I definitely recommend that people get out and they take as many photos to help them figure out how to correctly frame an image, how to get the right context. Knowing where your image was taken is really important, especially if you think about photos as being visual and people may be looking at them in a gallery one day. They want to be able to know what the context was. Focus and sharpness is something that is also really important. Now, the photo I showed you earlier on, where my daughter's face wasn't very sharp, she wasn't in focus, she was squinting, not a great photo, and can be distracting. You don't want the person looking at the photo to be distracted by the fact that that person isn't in focus. You want them to look at that person or look at what makes that person beautiful or what it is that you're trying to show about that person. So here's an image that I'm going to put up on the screen. Here it is. So this is taken from the inside of my conservatory. Looking out, please ignore the towels hanging out in the background. Obviously we can see the garden and we can see all the plants again, but there are two objects in the foreground which are out of focus because my focus is set to these plants over here. So what I wanted to highlight in this image is the plants that you can see, not the ornaments inside the house. However, sometimes having an object in your frame which is out of focus can direct the viewer's attention to what is in focus. And sometimes you can use out of focus elements to do that. But the issue here is that this element it's just too distracting because it's in the foreground, it's right in front of your face, and it also covers part of the image and it just doesn't look nice. So I would take those two elements out of the image totally and not have them in there, or I would make them the focus of my image. So if I stop this and share the second image where I've done that. Okay, so now you should be able to see this. Now, obviously the plants aren't in focus anymore, and the two ornaments inside the house are now in focus. They are very sharp. Okay, so if you, I don't know if I'm zooming in, I don't know if you can see that being zoomed in. I think you can. If I scroll down, you can see such minor detail on there. It's very, very sharp. So whenever you're taking your image, make sure that you've locked focus. And if you're doing it on a mobile phone, most new mobile phones will know to lock focus on the closest image to you. But if it doesn't, if you're using an older mobile phone, then you'll have to tap the screen most of the time and get focus on whatever you're looking at, and try and make whatever is your focus to be actually really, really sharp, so that it's nice and flattering. Holding your camera still is really important. If you're using an older mobile phone, maybe you might get some shake in it. The newer mobile phones, if you've got some of the new iPhones, only a few years old, they've got amazing image stabilization. So even if you've got a slightly shaky hand, and if you're doing this, they're still going to get some really, really sharp images. So making sure that your image is really sharp is really important. It looks more flattering, and it just brings the attention of the viewer to everything in the image, and you can see, I can see all of the dust on there and everything. It shows I need to dust my house. But you can see how sharp this is, and even though there's an out of focus background, the attention of the viewer is on the ornaments. If you want it to be on the plants, remove these from the frame. Don't have them in there because it just doesn't look nice. So I suppose focus and sharpness is something that you will learn to do over time, making sure that your object is sharp, your person's face is sharp. If you're using a newer camera like this, a lot of the new Sony cameras come with something called IAF, eye autofocus. And as soon as you hold the camera up, it automatically just locks onto the eye. And I suppose whenever you're taking a portrait or a photo of a person, if the eyes are really sharp, that's what's going to make the photo so flattering. So try and keep the eyes in focus. And I know for a fact that my iPhone, as soon as I hold it up to someone's face, it will lock, it put a square around somebody's face. So it will lock focus on their face. And I know the Samsung phones and all these kind of smartphones do that. So try and make sure that your images are nice and sharp, and focus is really, really important. I'll share another, I'll give you another example of that, actually, where it probably works a little bit better. So if I share a screen, and this one here. Okay, so here we want to have a look at this candle holder in the background. It's there. This is the element at the front is another candle holder. It's out of focus, and it might be distracting, it might not be distracting, depends on how you look at it. But I suppose it brings the attention to the element in the back, and that makes it more flattering. But some people will just say, oh, I much rather have the element at the front in focus. So you can switch them around. You can switch them around, or you can have the element at the back in focus. So if I load up this image now, and share this, it seems to make more sense, doesn't it? That the element at the front is in focus. You can still see the element in the background, it's out of focus, but it depends on where you want the viewer to be directed to. And obviously anything in focus is going to catch the eye of the viewer. So that was one more example of that. I just wanted to share some photos with you of my trips abroad, and how to be creative when you're doing your photography. Especially when you go abroad, you're going to find and you're going to see so much more culture. I always think, I was saying to my wife last night, I wish I was living somewhere up north where I could just drive 10 minutes and be out in the countryside, where we've got hills and viaducts and naturally occurring kind of beautiful landscapes which I could just photograph. I mean, Peterborough's not bad, but it's a bit flat. So when I travel abroad, I am almost super excited about the images that I'm going to get, because I know that I'm never going to get those images here. I'm always going to get those images, those interesting cultural images from different parts of the world. So here is a few images that I'd like to share, and some of them I might censor what I put up, because just to give you some background, I travel to usually I travel to very poor regions of a country and photograph people in their context of poverty, and sometimes the images aren't, you know, they highlight the truth as opposed to being beautiful, but they are beautiful in their own right as well. So I think I'll start with this image here. This was some street photography I did in Bangladesh. I was in Bangladesh in February, and I actually managed to just get back before lockdown kind of started. And you can see this chap here is in the middle of a busy bazaar, and he's out pushing his cart with bananas on it. And I was just out walking around the middle of the streets, and I was just taking photos of people. And it's so interesting because people are so much more welcome to cameras, I find, in other parts of the world. For some reason, I find that here in the UK, we're a little bit apprehensive if somebody's walking around with a camera. Or maybe I've just experienced that, I don't know. But with this image, you can see the chap, he's pushing his cart, it's got bananas on it. I've added a bluey filter to the image, just to kind of like create some drama around the image. But I really like this image because all the bananas are in focus, but the chap is out of focus, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I want it to be the focus. I wanted the focus to be the bananas on the car. But you can also see him in the background, and you can also see other people and their modes of transport. If you look at the back, you'll see a rickshaw at the back. And you can see that this man at the back is pulling the rickshaw on his bike. So you can see the different types of modes of transport. I'll find another image to share with you guys. There's one image here that I really, I don't know if I put it in my, okay, so I'm going to share this image here because it was a really busy image, and you could argue that I didn't do a very good job of context on the image. But I just wanted to show you that. So here we are. Now these chaps here are putting a water well into the ground, and it's really quite busy because you've got somebody on the left-hand side who's in the way, and then you've got the man who's got the spanner in his hand. He's obviously on the floor, and if you look carefully, there's another chap who's hidden behind this chap in the foreground, and then you've got the chap in the orange t-shirt who's been cut off, and then you've got the guy in the red sports t-shirt whose head is being chopped off as well. And so it's a really busy image, but in its own right, it's actually I quite like this because these guys were so busy in what they were doing. Everybody was mucking in, and it was real teamwork. And the image, I suppose, captures that exactly. It captures the screen. It captures the teamwork that was going on. And it's so, the way everything was being done was so crude, and I think it's just nice the way it's being captured. There was no kind of, I mean, here in this country we'd see, you know, cordoned off areas where people are working. There were electric cables in the area, and people were just freely walking by. So I just captured that, and I quite like the image for that reason. When you're in countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, or anywhere in the South Asian subcontinent, or even parts of the Arab world like Jordan, you're going to see a lot of people that are either refugees or people who are begging for food, or people living in situations where it's not great. I don't have many of those images at hand to show you, but I've got one that I'd like to show. And this was in the busy streets of Bangladesh, in a city called Sylhet. It's where lots of the people, Bengalis who are living in the UK, actually come from Sylhet. But I'll share this image with you guys now. And it's a bit of a heartbreaking image, really. So I do apologize for sharing it in advance, but I think it just shows something really profound, in the sense that this man is obviously disabled and he's living on the street, and he's also begging. But I just felt at the time that I wanted to take his image because he was begging, and people are so used to seeing beggars on the people are so used to seeing beggars on the street, and they almost just fade into the background. And people like us, even though I travel and I see this all the time, whenever I see somebody, I always think, oh, that's not, that's quite heartbreaking, and I offer some money or whatever I can. But these people often just fall into the background and they're just not noticed. And this image shows exactly that. So the context of this image is that this man is on the floor. He's clearly disabled. He's clearly dependent. And he is looking at the chap who's walked off and just ignored him, and hasn't given him any money. And it just captures this story that the hard life and the tough life that some people have living in the streets. And if you look at Peterborough, and if you look around in our area or in the UK, it's the same story. There are people just sat on the streets. Out of 20 people that walk by, one person will give, and the rest of them just walk by. And it was just so interesting to capture. I don't want this to become a charity fundraiser session, but I'm just saying that from the point of view to capture that, because that is the life of that person that 1 out of 10 people will give and 9 out of 10 people will ignore. And that this image captures exactly that. The man had his hand up in the air, he started to bring it down, the person's walking off, and you've managed to capture that moment. And it's I suppose it's something that you learn to do over a period of time. But I always say that photography, if you're a photographer, and if you're a good photographer, or if you consider yourself to be a good photographer, you will see moments unravel in front of you before they even happen. And I suppose that is saying that you've got an eye for photography, is to capture moments that you can predict are going to happen. Now, you could argue, well, that's obviously, so people are going to walk by. What's so great about that? You've taken a photo of somebody walking by a beggar, that happens all the time. But actually capturing the essence of that moment in this way is something that if you can learn to do, your images will be very, very flattering, and people will love your images. Now, earlier on, I was talking about having your image correctly exposed. So I'm going to go back to this image now so you can see. Okay, having your image correctly exposed is really important. And if you're using a mobile phone, it will automatically correctly expose. If you're using a professional camera like I am, I have to manually expose everything myself. And just to let you know that with a camera like this, I can set it to auto, but I won't, because there are so many capabilities of this camera. So I always shoot manual. I adjust the exposure. I calculate exposure actually right before I take an image, and I take the photo and I try and keep the exposure right, so that any bright areas don't lose detail. But if you look over here, if you look at the hands of the man, they're obviously very sharp and they're nicely exposed because you can see the color of the skin, and you can see also the ground. So there's not too much light. I can see the ground, but if you look at the back is overexposed and there's actually no detail left in this wall at the background, or it's actually outside a mosque. There's just no detail left in there anymore. And you could argue, well, that's not a very great image because, there's no detail in the image, but actually blowing out this background here means that people won't look at it, but people will look at what you want them to look at. And that is the chap here in the foreground and the chap who's walking by, who's left him. So having your images blown out sometimes can actually be really quite flattering. And you'll see wedding photographers often do this. They'll have, brides and they'll be wearing their white dresses and they'll blow out the dress and it'll just make for a more flattering image. Or sometimes I'll blow out the sky and focus on the bride, and her dress will be in focus and really sharp, but the sky is all blown out. And it's okay to do that because you want that person to come out rather than it just being a very calculated textbook image. And that's one of the great things about photography. Even though there are rules about exposure, there's rules about sharpness and focus and context and composure. You don't always have to follow them if you can make an image look good. And that will come to you with time. And you know, and I don't mean to boast, or I don't mean to say that I'm amazing, but I'm sure there is so much that I could learn from photography still, and from other photographers. And I'd love to meet some photographers from around the world and see how they take their images. I'd like to share another image. This is one of my all-time favorite images. I just think it's one of the best images I've ever captured. There are other good images, of course, but this image here is just one of the best photos I've ever captured. And I always look at it and it makes me happy. We're in Lebanon here, and the ladies in the foreground are volunteers. The lady on the right, she organized a trip where she took volunteers out to Lebanon, and you see the children at the front. Now they're out of focus and we can't really make much about them, but that's okay because it's the looks on the faces and the smiles on the volunteers' faces that really captures so much emotion. And what you can see is that they're handing obviously something out to them, and they're interacting with these children, and the children are all crowded around them, and they're obviously so happy. It's almost like the image can be used on the front page or in the double spread of a magazine somewhere, promoting, you know, any kind of voluntary work that you may do here or abroad. And it's just such a nice image because you've got smiles on faces. It's very natural. There is no forced element to this image. And that is something that is really, really important. Often people say to me, oh, I didn't even realize that you had taken that photo. And I think a good photographer, even though you can carry around with you such a huge camera, if you have the ability to blend into the background and hide and take photos of people when they don't know that you're taking them, obviously within reason, if you're at an event and they've seen you around, then that's fine. And you take photos of them, and when they come out and when they look at them, they're like, wow, that's amazing. And that's because you've taken the photo in the moment without meddling with the moment, if that makes sense, without setting it up or without framing it so that it looks like that. And often people do that, and at weddings you're going to see sometimes that happens. But when you're doing street photography, that is the best part of street photography, that you can capture a mood so easily because people are just so busy going out and about with what they're doing. So coming back to the image, I'd just like to share that with you guys again. You can see that it's such a happy image. It's not the original image that I took. I think it's like a copy with lower resolution, so it might not be as sharp. But it doesn't even matter because the context is so nice. Everybody's smiling. It's so the emotion is so well captured. And the great thing about this is, even that there's a chap at the background, I can't really get rid of him. Even though there's a chap in the background, it doesn't matter because the foreground is so prominent. And the other great thing is that the children at the front, you can only see the back of their heads, so you cannot recognize them. So if I did want to share that image, I just need the permission of 1, 2, 3, 4 children, 4 people, and I can get that image out. And I may consider doing it one day. I just want to share another photo with you of similar time. Actually, I think it was the same day. of one of our volunteers. So I'm just going to go back to this. Oops. Sorry, that's the wrong image I've shared. I'll stop the share. Okay, I'll start again. This one here, this is also a very lovely image. And for me, the reason why this image is great is because, first of all, the light is hitting the face. So that makes it really flattering. Obviously, the volunteer in question is handing out a box to a beneficiary. So we've got somebody who's benefiting from somebody's work. And the volunteer herself, she's looking down, she's, I suppose, got quite a humble look to her, and it also captures that emotion. She's looking down, she's humble, she's modest, she's giving a box to somebody, and it just captures that. It just captures that moment really, really nicely. And you've got two guys in the back, two young people in the back who are looking. I don't know if they're looking at me or they're looking at what's going on, but there were so many people standing around looking at, obviously, the work that we were doing. So eyes were on us as volunteers. But obviously this volunteer was, when she was given this image, I just was able to snap it. Now the colors in this image, that's just me playing about with colors. I like to play with colors. It's not, they are certainly not natural. This has got a nice bluey, tealy effect to it. And I don't know if you've seen photos. These days, a lot of artists who are taking photos, they love this filter called teal and orange, and go and research it. It's actually really lovely. And some of the images that you can take, you can edit them afterwards to look teal and orange. We won't talk about editing too much, but it can, changing the color of your image can flatten, it can create a really flattering look. However, you have to be really careful because you can change what is not natural anymore. So if, depending on what you want, if you want an image to be natural, keep the colors that come out the camera. Your camera will generally do a good job of being color accurate. You can tweak them on your camera app, on your phone app, or you can do it in Photoshop if you're well versed. So yeah, this image was, I just thought it captured emotion really, really nicely. She's looking down, there's light on her face, there's a shadow on the side, which is fine, it's okay, but it just captures this lovely emotion. Let's see if there's something else I can share with you guys. Okay, this image here, let's put it up. Now, do you know how I talked earlier on about making your images natural and not to frame something? Well, it's also okay to set something up, because even though you set something up, you can create something natural out of it. So this young lady was, she was in a remote village in Bangladesh, and I took a photo of her and I said to her, put your hand, because she put a hand on her face. She put her hand on her face like this because she was shy. And then she took it down and I took the photo. And then I thought, and I asked the lady next to me, because I didn't speak, we didn't have a common language. And I said to her, put your hand on your face again. And so she did. And it was either going to be hit or miss. Either it's going to be, I'm going to get the natural shot, or I'm not. So even though I asked her to do it, she did it in such a way that was natural to her, and she had that little smile in the back, and I just caught the image and it was great. And it's perfectly exposed, her face is perfectly exposed, and she's got this smile on her face, but it also shows some, I don't know, the innocence of a child, I suppose, is coming through. And the other thing which is so great about this image is that she's obviously got henna on her hands. And the whole image is just lovely. I just love the way it's been captured. And so if we go back to some of our things that we're talking about in the workshop, we've got obviously composure, you know, she's in the middle of the frame. She's not right at the bottom, right at the top. Even though you can't really make out the context too much because it's all out of focus, it doesn't really matter because the subject is doing so much that your attention is always going to be on the subject. The subject is sharp and well lit, and obviously what she's doing makes the image really attractive. And so I just managed to capture this photo, and it was like, I was really happy with it. So if you ever do go abroad, and goodness knows if we ever manage to fly again or not, if you ever go abroad, most people take their cameras with them. And most people take photos of their family and their on their, you know, friends or whoever they go out with, and that's fine, you know, because those are the memories that you want. But sometimes, if you have opportunities, go out and photograph people and objects and the natural setting. And I know we've only got a couple of minutes left, but I'm going to share another image with you guys. Just capturing life. And you'll find that people love to see that kind of stuff, capturing life and trying to figure out what the expression on the person's face means. I'm just going to share this image with you now. I don't know if that's come up. I don't know what I'm sharing. Let me just try that again. It's that one there. There we go. Now, we just happened, this is in Bangladesh, we just happened to walk into somewhere to have some food, and this guy was cooking at the front. He was making some small chapatis, and I took a photo of him. And you can see some people in the background. Even though the chapatis themselves are blown out, there's like, they're too bright. But the one in here, the one inside on the silver plate is showing up, and he's just busy doing what he's doing. And I just thought it was a nice image to capture people doing what they're doing. And it's the life, it's the busy life in a bazaar somewhere in the South Asian subcontinent. And it just looks really, really good. Yeah, so I think Emily, we've come to just a minute too. I hope that was I hope that was informative, and it wasn't. I know there wasn't much interaction, but I hope I didn't bore you, or it wasn't too boring.
Kat, you're welcome to ask any questions if you want to. Not to put you on the spot or anything.
Hi, Kat.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you. Yeah, you said that you only you always use manual, so you never use like the semi-automatic at all. You don't ever use, like, when I'm talking about like because I have a Nikon.
Okay.
So you don't use like a aperture priority or shutter priority. You always use like full manual.
I always go full manual because I just love to have complete control over my image, and that doesn't mean that you can't use aperture priority or shutter priority. But I suppose in my head, if I'm in aperture priority mode and I've selected the aperture, but I know that I can make the image better by changing the shutter as well and the ISO. I would feel like I've made the cake but not at it, because I've just not done a proper, if that's the correct analogy, I've not done a proper job of it. But you know, it doesn't matter. Those modes are there for people to use. So if you use aperture priority mode, go for it, you know.
Yeah, because sometimes I find, like, if I'm walking around and I see an opportunity, and like I'll take that opportunity to make the photograph, and then I could be walking around again, and then there's something else, and now I don't have time to go through the whole, you know, just like, oh no, and then I've missed a shot.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely. And that's exactly why those modes are there. Aperture priority is a really good mode because it allows you to set your aperture. Everything else will automatically adjust for you, and you can then blow out your background depending on what lens you're using. But the thing I'd say to you is this: if you're photographing in aperture priority mode, that's great. But when you're taking your photo, and you've got your camera up to your eye, just look at the settings inside. Look at what the camera has decided to use as the ISO and the shutter, and just make a mental note of them all the time. And then when you feel confident enough, go to full manual and see if you can replicate those images yourself, and then see if you can do a little bit better, because cameras will always err on the side of caution. And they will always use settings where there's no risk of an image being ruined, because otherwise people will be like, well, this is terrible, this camera's terrible, right? But if you're in manual, you have complete control over your image. And I suppose if you're walking in a particular direction and the sun's behind you, and then you want to turn around and walk the other direction and the sun's in front of you, your settings are going to be totally different. And that's probably the hard part, isn't it? But you know, there's nothing wrong with shooting aperture priority. And what you have to remember is, I'm really enthusiastic about every little thing that my camera can do. But most people just want to see a flattering image. They just want to see a nice image. So even if your shutter could be slightly different and your ISO could have been lower, it really doesn't matter. If you've got the right context, and if you've got the right person, the right frame, you're gonna get a $1 million photo anyway. So it's not the end of the world. And I guarantee you, I promise you, with time, you'll learn how to shoot manual. And to be honest, I only ever shot in manual. I never ever shot aperture. I've never done it.
But you see, when I started photography, I used to shoot in manual, full manual, because I was told, oh, this is the way. But I got so many blurry photos, so many that I lost the moment. I had to delete, like, there was just no point in keeping any of them. And I thought, oh, well, I have to delete that, delete this, delete. And I lost so many opportunities because I was shooting in full manual. And I just thought, there's got to be a better way. And then somebody suggested aperture priority. And I thought, okay,
and the camera does a lot of the work, but you still get to keep that control over one element at least. And aperture is a really important part of any image. And you could see from the images that I was showing you, the backgrounds were all blown out, out of focus. And I know that a cheaper camera compared to a more expensive camera won't be able to do that. But if you have it and you can do that, why not? And even a cheaper camera, if you've got, like, what camera do you use, for example?
I have two. I have a Nikon D5600 and a D5100 and a D5100 as well.
Okay, so there's very capable cameras. I used to be a Nikon shooter until I decided that I had to do video as well with my filmmaking, and then I had to move over to Canon. But I always loved using my Nikon camera. Those cameras are really, really good. And even with a kit lens, you can still control your aperture to a certain degree, depending on how far zoomed in you are. But if you wanted to improve your photography a little bit more and get some of those, I don't know if you get out of focus backgrounds, but if you buy, so if you buy the 50mm f1.8 lens, I think they're about 110. Oh, you have that?
Yeah.
It's one of the best lenses as far as I'm concerned, because it's an awkward lens. It's an awkward focal length. You're neither close and you're neither far, and so you have to do a lot of work to get those right framing. But it teaches you a lot. So if you've got that, I would recommend just having that on there, unless you're doing landscapes, of course.
Yeah.
Sorry, I know I babble on a lot. Sorry, if you have any other questions.
Thank you. And I have another question.
Yeah.
Now, you said you didn't want to talk too much about editing, but which program do you use? Which one do you typically use? Do you use Photoshop? Do you use Lightroom? Or I don't know, is there anything else?
There's actually a lot of there's a lot of software out there, and these photos that I was recently showing you in Bangladesh, believe it or not, those photos, I shoot all my photos in RAW. I don't do
that JPEG. Was my other, yes.
Yeah. So if you want
to, did you say RAW and JPEG or
RAW, just RAW? I won't do JPEG. I'll always just do RAW, because I always feel like I want to have that control.
Right.
And if you want to edit, you should really shoot RAW, because editing a JPEG becomes quite difficult. But that said, for example, this image, I'm just going to very quickly bring it back up on the screen. This image here was taken in RAW. But then, believe it or not, all I did was, at the time, I just used the Wi-Fi on my camera to send it to my phone. And when it's sent to my phone, it won't send a RAW image because it's too big. It'll send a JPEG copy of it. And when it sends a JPEG copy, I just edited it on my phone. So I edited the JPEG. So yeah, so these cameras, even though you want to shoot RAW in them, the JPEG files are nice and big, so you can edit them. So that one was done on my phone, and if you're out and about, sending them to your iPad or to your phone and then editing there, that's okay. If you want to do a professional shoot, I edit on Lightroom, and I've been using Lightroom for the past couple of years on my computer, on my MacBook. But recently, I've started to use Lightroom on my iPad, and
I have that.
Yeah, and it's great editing on there with your Apple Pencil. I mean, I know these are all extra luxuries, you don't have to, but definitely the one piece of software that I recommend you using is Lightroom. I very rarely use Photoshop. Sometimes I do if I've taken a photo of a model and there might be blemishes on the face, and I have to just, you know, clear those blemishes up. But I don't like to do that because I consider myself to be a street photographer. So I capture things in their natural light, not editing them up and making people look thinner or changing their lips and all that. I don't really like doing that. Not that I can, I haven't really spent time doing that. But to answer your question, definitely go with Lightroom. It's a pain. I think it's £10 a month. You can't buy the software.
I bought it, but I haven't really used it yet. And so, but when you take your photos on your camera and then you send it to your mobile to do the quick editing, what software do you use? Like Snapseed, or do you use Lightroom with the other light you have your mobile? How do you edit it then?
So I don't know, what phone do you have?
I have an iPhone 8 Plus.
Yeah, so if you send the photo over to your camera, I mean, it depends on Nikon. I think it's something called, what did you just say?
It's called Snap. What the heck is it? Because I haven't used it in Snapbridge.
Snapbridge, yeah, that will send the photo over to your phone, and it'll sit in your camera roll. And then if you load up the photo on your camera roll and just hit the edit, you've got all these filters at the bottom.
Okay, so you use the editing that is built into the iPhone.
Edit iPhone app, yeah. I mean, I can use Lightroom. On the iPad, I will always use Lightroom because I bring RAW files in. But on my mobile phone, I just use the iPhone editing app is probably the best out there on any smartphone. And it allows you to do some funky stuff. And with that photo I just showed you, it had a very blue kind of effect to it. And I don't ever tell people this, but my secret is that I use the Vivid Cool filter. So if you look at your iPhone, there's a filter called, and it's amazing. I love it. It's just the best. And all those photos I just showed you, they were all done using the Vivid Cool filter on my iPhone to a JPEG file. So there's so much. There's so much you can do with technology that we just have in our hands today, that you don't even have to be doing pro level stuff.
Thank you so much. I learned so much from this. From the very beginning, I love what you did with when you took the pictures of your plants in the back garden, and you were standing up looking down. It didn't look, because I've got a lot of pictures like that where I was looking down, awful. But when you changed it, what a difference. I learned. So thank you so much.
No problem at all. No, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm glad you learned something.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining. And do keep an eye on 60 Gladstone Street for more workshops and stuff that's coming up.
I'll keep an eye on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.